Israel has broken the ceasefire.
Break and overturn the ceasefire agreement.
Israel launched dozens of airstrikes ending the ceasefire.
While people were still having their pre-dawn meal, as is currently Ramadan, killing at least 330 people.
At least 400 people have been reportedly killed.
Babies, children, all over the floor.
No, Israel did not violate, break, or end the ceasefire. The ceasefire has already expired 2 weeks before Israel lost patience with Hamas, which refused to accept any of the proposed second-stage ceasefire deals. I mean, there are so many rumors and misinformation being spewed by journalists and major media outlets about why fighting resumed in Gaza. So let's get the record straight. And by the way, it's not just in Gaza. Fighting has also reignited all across the region, like in Syria and attacks in Yemen and the IRGC by US forces. So what's really going on? The ceasefire with Hamas ended on March 2nd. It started on January 19th and was agreed upon to last 42 days, meaning that there were 2 weeks where the ceasefire had expired. Hamas didn't continue releasing hostages, but Israel remained outside of Gaza. It included the release of 33 Israeli hostages, mainly women, some civilians, some soldiers, male civilians, and elderly men, in exchange for around 1,300 Palestinian prisoners, while discussions were held for a second stage of the ceasefire and the hostage deal. Additionally, Israeli troops withdrew entirely from the Gaza Strip and allowed even more humanitarian aid to flow in. Despite the numerous attempts that were made by Israel and the US to reach a second stage deal with the Gazans to release all of the remaining hostages that they brutally kidnapped on October 7th of 2023, no agreement has been good enough for Hamas to accept. While these attempts were being made, the Gazans enjoyed a 2-week of a ceasefire without releasing a single hostage. They enjoyed all of the perks agreed upon without having to fulfill their end of the deal. But that's not the reason that fighting has been renewed in Gaza. So, during the early hours of March 18th, the IDF resumed fighting in the Gaza Strip, with airstrikes seen in Rafah, Khan Yunis, Bureij, Zaytun, Dir al-Balach, Nusayrat, Al-Karma, Beit Hanun, and other locations. So, what was the actual real reason Israel renewed the fighting on March 18th? Well, firstly, the multiple high-ranking Hamas leaders that have been eliminated. Amongst them, we saw Yasser Harb, Hamas's political bureau, Issam al-Da'alis, also Hamas political bureau and head of the Governmental Activity Monitoring Committee, a position roughly akin to Hamas's prime minister, Abu Ubaida al-Jamasi, also part of Hamas's political bureau and head of the Hamas's emergency committee, which has managed Gaza during the war. Mahmoud Abu Watfa, a highly ranking official in the ministry responsible for security forces outside of its military wing, head of Hamas's police, basically, and internal security services. Bahajat Abu Sultan, also a high-ranking official in the ministry responsible for security forces outside of its military wing. Ahmad al-Khatta, the Director General of Hamas's Justice Ministry in Gaza. And those were just some of the names of high-ranking Hamas members eliminated that morning. The list has gotten longer since. The second reason, during the few weeks prior to the renewal of the fighting, Hamas has been planning another raid on military and civilian targets. Israeli intelligence understood that it was going to be immediate. And if there was something that we've learned from October 7th, remember all the accusations about why the IDF ignored intelligence reports, alerts, and signs, is that we won't wait for the Gazans to strike first. Surprise us, kill us, and kidnap more people to use as bargaining chips.
בתקופה האחרונה מזהים בישראל אירוע חריג שעשוי להעיד על ניסיון של חמאס לפשוט ולחדור ליישובים ישראליים כפי שקרה ב-7 באוקטובר.
Israeli intelligence has been closely tracking the different Gazan factions for these past few weeks, and the attacks were primarily aimed at preventing the planned Gazan raid, which would have allowed them to kidnap more hostages and return to the negotiations table with more innocent human lives as leverage. On March 30th, they offered another 50-day ceasefire in exchange for only 5 hostages. The negotiations were supposed to be for all the remaining hostages, but Hamas prefers to prolong the war and keep torturing innocent lives, theirs and ours. Hostages are their only real lifeline for survival and making demands, which creates the incentive for them to try and get more. Many intelligence-based warnings have been sent to Israelis who live around Gaza during these few weeks. Farmers and agricultural workers have been told to avoid working outside. Israeli intelligence has had a very high degree of confidence based on the variety of proof that they have seen, heard, and gathered in Gaza about the planned raid. But how can the Gazans conduct another raid after all of this war and destruction? Well, Thanks to the ceasefire, the Gazans use this time to rearm, refuel, and replenish the underground stockpiles of food, energy, weapons, while also recruiting new terrorist members. Israeli opposition member of the Knesset, Bugi Alon, claims that as of March 2025, Hamas has over 25,000 members and the PIJ has 5,000, not counting other Gazan terrorist groups and the Gazan civilians who wear no uniform but cross the border to kidnap Israelis, murder them, take human parts as souvenirs, hold hostages in their family homes, and even have terror tunnels dug from their children's bedrooms, just to name a few of the terrorist behaviors from some of the Gazan uninvolved civilians. Regardless if this would have been a raid of 50 terrorists on one military post or 500 terrorists on Israeli villages, additional hostages would have been taken, and Israelis would have been murdered, and we have no intention of letting that happen. Third reason, preparing for the ground invasion. During any military operation around the world over the past centuries, you begin with what's called in the American military setting the stage. Clearing explosives, ambushes, and obstacles from the air through airstrikes and or artillery before sending in your ground troops to minimize their casualties. In addition to the fact that a ground invasion is much more destructive than airstrikes due to the nature of urban warfare. Gazans have been caught placing obstacles, bombs, and explosive charges in multiple civilian places in an attempt to fight against the Israeli invasion that would have followed their planned raid. These explosives have been placed in the narrow streets, main roads, civilian houses, buildings, and even tents, just to name a few. So some of these strikes targeted these locations and the people placing the explosives in these different civilian locations. Fourth and unofficial reason, demonstrate to Gaza that we're serious about our two demands, which have remained unchanged since October of 2023. Release all of the hostages and their complete surrender. During the ceasefire, Hamas felt comfortable enough to break it on multiple occasions, like the 5 buses it bombed inside of Israel on February 20th and the dozens of terrorist shooting and stabbing attacks throughout Israel. Israel and the US have issued multiple warnings to the Gazans during the ceasefire to release all of the hostages and surrender. Hamas has either ignored them or threatened back. Israel is not planning on making empty threats. For the past year and a half, ever since December of 2023, we have been fighting Hamas and the different Gazan terrorist groups while inadvertently supplying them with resources that allowed them to fight against Israel. Israel opened multiple aid points, letting in more and more electricity, gas, water, food, equipment to our enemy, all while fighting. The plan for this renewed fighting, now officially called Oz V'Cherev, Violent Sword, is to ensure that this contradiction will not keep on happening. If Hamas and the Gazans want to have their cake and eat it too, they can either ask for help from their other border, the one with Egypt, and see if the Egyptians are willing to come to their aid after years of smuggling terror and drugs from their border, or decide to finally think of the Gazan civilians, whom they openly admitted that they don't protect, by finishing the war through releasing the hostages and surrendering.
قام بتشييد 500 كيلومتر من الأنفاق. لماذا لم يشيد مآوي يلجأ إليها المدنيون خلال القصف؟
القطاع غزة فأنت تعلم والجميع يعلم بأنه 75% منه لاجئين.
Israel has also conducted airstrikes in Syria to prevent al-Jilani's jihadi regime, Hezbollah or any other Iranian proxy, from gaining access to the former regime's weapons and ammunition and using them against Israel. Before al-Jilani declared himself Syria's supreme leader, the country had a fully equipped army backed by Iran, with stockpiles of ammunition, tanks, rockets, missiles, warplanes, and more. Israel has no interest in letting these military equipment reach any organization who wants to arm themselves with these capabilities. Syria is very unstable right now, as Israel has warned right after Assad's regime fell, and cannot be trusted. We just saw the brutal massacres that al-Jilani's forces committed against the Alawis, the Druze, and other groups in Syria. Despite al-Jilani's claiming publicly that he opposes these attacks, these atrocities align precisely with his history of terrorism and al-Qaeda ideology. And the fact that this happened in multiple occasions around Syria shows that he is either incapable of controlling his own jihadi armed men from committing massacres, or that this is entirely intentional. So, whoever gets the former Assad regime's military arsenal and can, and most likely will, use them against Israel, and Israel is preventing this from happening. And for the cherry on top, the Gaza Ministry of Health and the Red Crescent, aka Hamas started reporting on the morning of March 18th, just minutes after the attacks, on widely different and exaggerated numbers of Gazan casualties. Just for reference, on the evening of October 7th, 18 hours after the massacre, Israel reported around 300 to 400 casualties, when we know it was 1,200, because counting bodies takes time, not imagination. As of 8 a.m., we've seen reports of 100 people killed and all the way to 300 people killed in the different Gazan sources. According to them, mostly women and children. We already know this script, so let's break this down. Now that we have a little bit more experience with Hamas's casualty reports, it's clear that these figures, released on mere minutes after the strikes, inconsistent and suspiciously high, were not based on the actual count of the dead. Just like with the Al-Hali Hospital in November 2023, they make an absurd claim, post pictures and videos that might or might not be related to the strike or to Gaza without checking. They shift the narrative away from the actual military target through emotional manipulation or claims and images of dead children to claim that Israel is either 1, targeting children, or 2, indiscriminately carpet bombing in Gaza. Obviously, these two claims contradict each other. Israel is very clearly not targeting children. This claim can be easily debunked with multiple cold, unemotional facts. The complete lack of strategic military value in targeting children, Israel's famous and well-documented advanced precision, the significant cost of each bomb dropped, and the high-value terrorist leaders who were actually eliminated in these strikes. Yet, while Israel is the only one who conducts thorough investigation on the strikes and releases actual footage, the Gazans flood the media with additional unchecked claims, turning this into a game of cat and mouse. It's easy to make a claim with no backing. It's harder to prove it wrong. The first requires imagination. The second requires in-depth research. The results of unfactual, emotion-manipulative claims have been so strong around the world this past year and a half, and they have no reason to stop making them. So, be prepared. They release a plethora of claims, a variety of pictures and videos, and the damage is done. It doesn't matter if these videos were taken from the Syrian civil war, no matter if the numbers are wildly inaccurate to say the least, it's time to call things as they are. These numbers are lies until proven otherwise, and the burden of proof lies on the side making the accusation. So, a word of caution. Absurd numbers of casualties are about to start circulating everywhere. Hamas sympathizers will loudly proclaim that Israel is targeting innocent civilians, women and children. Videos and images, some real and some potentially unrelated, are going to start flooding your feed. But now that you and I have a little bit more experience with these kinds of highly emotional, manipulative claims and tactics, you know to be cautious and to wait for the actual facts before reacting emotionally in a way that could snowball into something worse. Hopefully, this war can end soon with all of the hostages back in their homes, or at the very least, with those murdered by the Gazans to be given an honorable burial in Israel with their families, and with no more terrorist organizations ruling over millions of people in Gaza. Am Yisrael Chai. I mean, I was saying be prepared, it's already started. It's the same day the feed was filled with. I mean, have you guys seen the UNRWA post talking about Aya, the little Gazan child, which was a picture from Syria? I mean, even UNRWA. It's tiring. It really is.